It's paid out over $17 million so far. We thought it was $15 million a couple days ago. And the names of the members and other workers on Capitol Hill that are involved in this are all under wraps. Until we and other outlets began to shine light on the Office of Compliance, most members of Congress didn't even know it existed. And therein lies the problem. When the government is this large and this unwieldy, mischief is bound to follow, both personal and professional. And soon no one is looking out for the people. They're just looking to cover themselves. And representatives, well, they settle into their positions of power, and year after year, term after term, they tune out their constituents. And pretty soon, they're taking orders from the swamp rather than the people. So if we want to end the corruption and move legislation on Capitol Hill, we need the old-timers to do the decent thing and begin to retire. John Conyers is the most potent example. The congressman who has just been charged this week with sexual harassment by 2 women so far in 2 days is 88 years old. He has held his congressional seat for 52 years. So LBJ was president, and the film Mary Poppins was released the year he was elected. Now, it's just time for John to go fly a kite, too. And he's not alone. Remember that song? Congressman Louise Slaughter, Democrat from New York, is also 88. She's been in Congress for 33 years. Republican Congressman Sam Johnson, 87 years old, and he's been kicking around Congress for 26 years. Sander Levin of Michigan is 86 years young, and he served as a congressman for 34 of those years. In the Senate, things aren't that much better. California Senator Dianne Feinstein, otherwise known as Di-Fi, is 84 years old, looking great though, and she's held the seat for a quarter of a century. Senator Chuck Grassley, also 84, and he's been Iowa Senator for half of his life, 42 years. Senator Orrin Hatch and Richard Shelby, both 82 years old, and have served 40 and 38 years, respectively. Just those 8 senators and congressmen have been padding around Congress on the taxpayers' dime for a combined 290 years. This is a total joke. President Trump was elected to be an agent of change, to break up the bureaucracy and drain the swamp. But that's hard to do when the old guard is impeding progress and protecting the bureaucracy in D.C. These elder statesmen need to look themselves in the mirror and ask, is a lifetime tenure what the founders really had in mind when they created this system? So what did Thomas Jefferson mean when he wrote this? A government by representatives elected by the people at short periods was our object and our maxim. Thomas Jefferson to Samuel Adams in 1800. Whenever a man has cast a longing eye on offices, a rottenness begins in his conduct. Thomas Jefferson to T. Coates in 1799. Well, now, I have to say this, too. To be fair, I realize there is wisdom with age, and experience in Congress can really be an asset at times. Senators like Senator Grassley and Senator Hatch, I like them both a lot. They've continued to listen to their voters on most issues, and they've been pushing through the president's judicial nominees and working hard on his tax bill, so that's good stuff. But for most people, decades of power, decades in power, can also isolate them, even from the best of men, and isolate them from the people they're supposed to represent. The people are crying out for transformational change, and the president is the impatient agent of that change. But to make it a reality, these incumbents, who have remained long past their expiration dates, have got to step aside. Let's get some new blood in there and some new ideas into the halls of Congress. And by the way, again, to be fair, there are some younger senators, a la Ben Sasse, Cory Gardner, and Jeff Flake, who've gotten pretty good themselves, pretty young too, at ignoring the will of their own voters. Amidst the calls for Al Franken and Roy Moore to step aside, I have a call of my own tonight. It's time for the dinosaurs of Washington, who refuse to press the president's agenda, to step aside and lumber off into the sunset. If they're not going to return power to the people, they need to go now. And that's the angle. And now, on to our top story tonight. A giant in the Democratic Party I just mentioned is being rocked by a second allegation of sexual misconduct. The second as many as 2 days. Congressman John Conyers paid his accuser $27,000 out of a congressional account in 2015 that drove another accuser to depression. The Ethics Committee is already investigating Conyers, but is that enough? And should taxpayers be on the hook for his misdeeds? Here to react is Kimberly Whaley. She's a professor of law at the University of Baltimore, and Congressman Ryan Costello, a Republican from Pennsylvania. It's great to see both of you. Happy Thanksgiving and all that jazz. Professor, let's talk to you. This is some wild stuff. I mean, we have had a cavalcade of accusations, some more recent than others, some really old, sweep both Hollywood, business, media, and politics. What is your take on this Conyers issue now that we know he used his own budget, his office budget, to pay some of these settlements?
Well, one thing that's been striking to me is the fact that our elected officials seem to be less accountable than those in the private sector, right? So we've seen it sweep through Hollywood. We've seen it happen in the halls of corporate America, and the retribution is swift, and the people are moved out and new people moved in, presumably, and the notion is that there's money at stake, right? And so when it comes to our elected officials, without a will to actually remove them from office from the voter standpoint, there's really not much that we can do. The Constitution doesn't say much about it. It's
Congressman Costello, to you on this. This is what Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Waters, said not too long ago about Congressman Conyers. There was a big women's forum. Let's watch.
There is a member of Congress who has been supportive of women for many, many years. He is quiet, he is confident, he is powerful, but he has impeccable integrity on all of our issues. Give John Conyers a big round of applause.
Woo, woo. Oh, I'm just giving him a big round of applause. Impeccable integrity, Congressman Costello. You heard the professor that, look, the Congress seems to have its own set of rules. That's how it's constituted. They govern themselves. They pass their own ethics rules, internal rules and regulations. But is it time that things begin to change? I mean, a lot of you guys didn't even know this slush shush fund even existed.
The short answer is things do need to change. I think that this legislation is a step in the right direction, because if you work on Capitol Hill and you've been mistreated, the process that you have to go through in order to file a complaint and have your grievance heard is so opaque, confusing, that it's just not fair. It's not fair and it's not right. And I think the slush fund that you spoke to is sort of indicative of the American public's frustration with, at times, how Congress is governed. They feel that there's a different set of rules for members of Congress. And the point here is, look, as a member of Congress, I have a budget. I pay staff, office supplies, office space, et cetera, et cetera. That money should not and cannot be allowed for use to pay off an employee who may have been mistreated. That has to end. I don't think
well,
that's
even
permitted.
Allowed? No, Congressman,
anyway,
my question to you is that even allowed?
I don't believe that it is, no.
Okay, so this will be part of an ongoing ethics investigation into John Conyers. I want you to speak to my angle that I gave at the top of the show. We got people in Congress who've been there a half a century plus. Now, I think old people, senior people, like, we're all getting up there, okay? They have a lot of wisdom. But this was not meant to be a permanent job security program working on Capitol Hill. But we got people up here for 3 decades, 4 decades, and in case of John Conyers, 5 decades. You kind of get removed from the people after 5 decades. You go from sedan to fundraiser to lobbyist to consultant to this and that, and the people are, where the heck are the people and all that?
That's going to be up to voters unless we have term limits. I mean,
right.
Look, the reality is that fund, some of that may have been sexual discrimination claims. A lot of that was workplace violations. Some of it could have been age discrimination, right? So there's a couple different ways to look at that. But I understand the sense of the American people is sometimes members of Congress are there too long. Obviously, it's up to the constituents in their district to vote them out if they don't want them there. But we're dealing here with a situation where when improper conduct does occur, are the mechanisms in place in order to right the situation, to treat a young woman who may have been mistreated? And I think that there's a feeling that the mechanisms that are in place now are insufficient. There's not transparency.
Congressman, you seem like a nice guy, and I'm sure you represent your constituents very well. But as a professor was pointing out, I mean, you can't get away with this stuff in corporate America anymore. At least you shouldn't. And the fact that women are forced into mandatory counseling. And, Professor, I want you to get into that. This is the way the system is now on Capitol Hill. Women who accuse, or men, who accuse others of sexual misconduct, other misconduct, have to go into forced counseling. Mandatory before the case can go forward.
30 days. And then there's 30 days of mediation.
The counseling should go the other way. Yeah, the counseling should go to the people who are doing the conduct. But, Professor, I want you to weigh in.
No, it's true. Well, I mean,
it's crazy.
Under the Constitution, the way you get rid of members of Congress is
vote them out.
Well, or under Article 1, you can, the other members of the Senate, in the Senate context, can actually expel them.
Well, that's what they're talking about.
But
with Roy Moore.
it takes 2/3 of the Senate to make that decision, and so we're talking big numbers. It's highly unlikely, and so what then applies? What applies are the rules that Congress decides to apply to themselves, and that is what we have.
So, Congressman, can you say tonight that there will be? Yeah, but Congressman, I know you didn't write the rules. Grassley did back in '95, and I like Senator Grassley. I think he's done a phenomenal job on most issues. But are you going to say tonight that you will fight for removal of mandatory counseling and a confidentiality provision in any future legislation? Because I see there are different versions of this floating around Capitol Hill.
The legislation that I have would remove the mandatory counseling. It would also make a member of Congress personally liable if they engaged in this type of behavior. It would also provide.
What about the names? Do you guys get to keep secret, or we get to know who you are? Not you,
no, we do. The name of the member of Congress, or if it was someone on their staff, would be included. That would have to be reported within 60 days at the end of a year. There would also be a survey done every year so that you have staff conveying what they feel the culture is on Capitol Hill.
Okay, so
there's a lot to this bill. I totally agree with what the professor says. Things need to change. The bill that I'm a part of would do that.
And Congressman Costello is part of he's a change agent in this. So I don't mean to come down on you on this, but I still can't believe this ever existed on Capitol Hill. It is preposterous on both sides. Men can be victims. Women can be victims. Men can be victims of false accusations. And we must say that. There are false accusations, and women can be victims, men can be victims, both can be. But I'm glad this is going to change. Professor, thank you. Happy